All right, well, then let's get started. Welcome to this program, The 3 Secrets to Cracking the Criminal Case. We welcome your questions, which we'll address at the end. And technology has not been viewing us favorably either yesterday or today, so we are being resourceful nurses. And therefore, we'll overcome this barrier that we've got right now. And Teresa will ask me when she wants me to change the slides. So you should be seeing my screen now. Teresa, nod your head. You can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So just a quick intro of myself. I'm Teresa Devitt-Lynch. I am currently in Fargo, North Dakota. I'm from North Dakota originally. I did 20 years in the Navy. And that's where I started doing forensic nursing. Starting out in the Navy, it was just sexual assault forensic examinations, but that area of forensic nursing has really expanded beyond that in current times now. So you'll see forensic examinations for domestic violence, strangulation, gunshot wounds, and other things, which is great because in doing a forensic exam and the documentation, it's much more detailed than other medical documentation. So those I love to see because it gives you a better picture. So I retired from the Navy in 2017, and I worked for a little bit in the civilian community, but I also, while I was in the Navy, I started doing consulting, and it was just for sexual assault cases. But then once I retired, the area of consulting just kind of blew up, and I consult on all different types of criminal cases, pretty much anything that has an injury involved with it. So, but one thing is, I've had to learn this on my own. Actually, you know what? Let's just go through the objectives and I'll talk about that in a couple slides. So we'll talk about assembling and explaining the medical evidence, kind of identifying what the attorney needs and how you can help them to decipher the medical evidence. Oh, you're very welcome. It's been my pleasure. Maintaining neutrality. The importance of your role as a neutral analyst in these cases is vital. And then becoming the attorney's safety net. So finding out what other services you can offer. Caitlin, go ahead. So there's a plethora of there's a plethora of cases that a forensic nurse or even a legal nurse consultant who does not have forensic nursing experience can consult on, as long as you have the right information. So we'll talk about not necessarily some of these specific cases. You can go to the next slide. But more so, what can you offer the attorney and what are some tips on working on these cases? So like I said, started in the Navy, and then once I retired, I started doing all these other different cases. And luckily, I've had great mentors along the way because there is no manual on how to consult on criminal cases. Granted, I think I've done one civilian case. I did one chronology, and that's about the extent that I have in working on civil cases. So the similarities, I don't think there's, vast differences, but there are some differences in consulting on criminal cases. And that's what drew me to provide training in this area, because I have figured this out as I've gone along, kind of trial and error and a lot of research on my own. And so my master's degree, the focus of my master's degree was nursing education. And that's one of the reasons why I continue to look for new areas that legal nurse consultants want education in, and trying very hard to provide that. Okay, go ahead. So like I said, any case with injuries. So I've done DUI cases, or driving while intoxicated, and then and murder as well. And in that picture in the upper corner there is actually a photo I got online from the Nicole Brown Simpson crime scene. So I thought that was interesting. Okay. So the first thing we'll talk about is assembling and explaining the medical evidence, and what are some of the key things in that area. And the first thing that you want to focus on, you can go ahead. First thing that you want to focus on are your opening discussions. So not only do you need a clear line of communication at the beginning of working with the attorney, but you need that throughout, because the case may change. They might take a plea deal and they don't tell you for 2 or 3 days. So you're expecting to continue to be working on the case, or the focus of their case may change. You always want to have a consistent and open line of clear communication with the attorney. And some of the key points we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. So a brief case summary. You obviously want to know what the case is about. You don't need a lot of details in the beginning, right after you've been contacted by the attorney, but you want to make sure that it's something either that you have experience in, you're an expert in, feel comfortable taking that case, or if you're not the best fit for it, then maybe you can help them find a consultant or an expert that is. So either way, even if you're not the best fit, you can always provide them services by helping them to find people that are. And then what do they want? Do they want consultation only? Do they want just expert witness testimony? Or do they want both? And that's important.
But I'm going to pick up the slack until she's able to sign back on. It's important to know your role right in the beginning of this case, because if you are consulting on the case behind the scenes, then anything that you prepare for the attorney is not discoverable. But if you are an expert witness, then anything that you put in writing or any emails between you and the attorney are discoverable. And a sharp adversary, opposing counsel, may ask for those emails to find out what you've discussed with the attorney. Have you shared any thoughts about case strategy? Have you pointed out any weaknesses in the case? All of that is appropriate if you're consulting only, but if you're an expert, everything that you have is discoverable and can and will be used against you by the opposing counsel. Another aspect of this that you can work on as a legal nurse consultant is that you can provide consultation on the medical issues. If you are comfortable with the expert role, your testimony is not on standards of care, but it may be explaining the medical details so that the jury can understand what occurred in this situation. And you may also be asked by the attorney to consult on trial strategy. Those conversations, if you're an expert, you can be asked about, but they're typically not anything that is put in writing. And you might be asked by the attorney to do some research. I got involved in a case one time with a young girl who was entertaining a man in the neighborhood while her parents were working, and she and the man both ended up getting a sexually transmitted infection. And the attorney was asking me about what had happened in this case, and I was able to point out to him that the man and the girl, who was 15, had the same culture results with the same organism. That key piece of medical evidence was enough to send him off to prison. You might be asked to assist with preparing demonstrative aids, and a little bit later, we'll go through some of the examples of the demonstrative aids. The attorney might turn to you and ask you, can you draft questions for depositions of opposing experts, of potentially other players in this game? And you might sit in interviews with expert witnesses, with the defendant, so that you can provide the attorney with some guidance on the medical issues. And with all of that together, your medical background provides the attorney with a helpful case analysis to assist in looking at the medical issues in the case.
Okay, so then what do they need? Obviously, your CV and your fee schedule are two of the most important elements of this job that you want to keep current and ready to turn over at any time. You don't know where you might meet somebody. And so you just want to have those ready to go so that you can give them to somebody at a moment's notice. They may or may not ask for references. A lot of my business does come from word of mouth. And so they've already been in touch with or talked to an attorney that I've worked with before. So I don't really get asked for that too much. But these last two items, the unbiased expert opinion and knowing your limitations, those are probably the two most important things. So your job is not in criminal cases, your job is not to win the case. Your job is to provide the medical, to objectively decipher the medical information in a manner that the attorney understands it so that they can use it in their litigation strategy, but also so that it can get presented to the jury in a manner in which they can utilize it to effectively come to a informed decision as to guilt or not guilt of the suspect. So it just, whatever I tell the attorney that I'm working with is the same thing I would tell the opposition if they were to call me and interview me for the case. There's nothing, I have nothing to hide. I have no dog in the fight. And then also knowing your limitations, but not only your limitations as a professional in terms of, what areas of expertise do you have? What are the extent of the services you can provide, but also limitations of the medical evidence. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. All right. And then what do you need? Some of the key information that you need is the trial date and logistics for travel. Let me tell you, traveling and trying to coordinate travel can be a pain in the rear. So understanding who's going to help you coordinate those, when is the trial date? I would just tell you, anticipate that to change once or twice, because I think I have a trial that has been rescheduled 4 times now. We're going on 2 years. And so, it just keeps changing. The retainer, if you work with public defender offices or military cases, you're not going to get a retainer. I can just tell you that right now. That's not something they're going to do. But if you get a private pay, which is, I guess, I could add that to the list. Is this a public defender or a military case, or is it private pay? Private pay, their client is actually paying them, and then they're paying you. So with that case, you can get a retainer. Otherwise, for government cases, chances are, you can always ask, but you're not going to get it. And then their case theory, what are they trying to prove, or what are they trying to refute? What are they trying to mitigate? What argument are they going to be presenting to the jury? In terms of the medical evidence that you identify and provide them, that won't change that. However, the case theory does impact how you consult. So if you have a sexual assault case in which the suspect's DNA was found on the victim, and he says, or the suspect, he or she, they say, yeah, we slept together. That's not, it was totally consensual. So it's not a whodunit case where DNA is going to play a huge role. It's more of, how does the prosecution show that there was no consent? How does the defense show that there was consent? So having an idea of where they're going. And there have been times where, I've found different elements of the case that have maybe altered slightly or added to their case theory as another element that they could argue. And then strategy. What is their strategy? What do they want to do with the medical evidence? And that's one of the first questions that I ask them before I even get the medical records. I'm like, okay, this is the case. These are these are the players. This is what happened. So what do you want to do with the medical evidence? Because again, it's not going to change the medical evidence that is there or what information you tell them, but it could help you in helping them develop their strategy. And then the last thing, if you are going to be an expert witness for the case, always, always, always ask for a trial prep. Because if it's, especially if it's an attorney you haven't worked with before, because they'll have insight on, the approach of the opposition, of the person who's going to be cross-examining you. You'll get an idea of the questions if you haven't provided them already. The questions that the attorney you're working with is going to help you. There's a lot of the times I've found that they just assume experts get on the stand and everything is good to go and the case and everything is going to go great. But I have seen things not go great. And so you always want to ask for a trial prep, regardless of how many times you've been on the stand. Okay. And the discovery. So discovery is just I'll be honest, I don't know if that's term is used in civilian cases or medical malpractice cases, but in criminal cases, that's the evidence that you're going to be reviewing. So it's the indicted charges. Once you get the discovery, that's the first thing that you want to look for. You want to look for a charge sheet, and it will tell you the exact crimes that the defendant is charged with. And the reason that's important is because they will also indicate some of the medical evidence that will be relevant. So for instance, if you have somebody who's charged with strangulation, well, strangulation is effectively blocking the oxygen getting to the brain. So the prosecution is going to be looking for evidence to support that. The defense is going to be looking for evidence to refute it or mitigate that. If you have somebody who's charged with a second-degree assault versus a third-degree assault, the difference there is the level and the extent of the injury, and that's what they're going to be speaking to. And even once you've looked at the indicted charges, look them up. You can Google every state's charges. So just find out what that state's charge number is in the title and look that up, because that will give you more information as well, because it includes all the elements that need to be proved in order for that person to be found guilty. Grand jury transcripts, you'll find that they may or may not have a medical person who testified at the grand jury, but that does give you information as to the victim's statements and their account of the alleged crime, maybe the detectives and other persons. And that information can be used during the trial. So you want to look at those if they're present. And then you've got the police reports, other forensic reports, any interview recordings, photos, videos, all of that stuff. It's important for you to have a basic understanding of and for you to review in relation to the medical evidence, which you will primarily get from the medical records. All right, so looking at the discovery, once you get the discovery packet, you want to look at what do I have and what do I need? So is there something that will impact or may impact your full evaluation of the case that is not present, and can they get that? So when you're looking at the discovery, you're looking at the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, and how does that coincide with the medical evidence? So if it was an assault with a baseball bat, are you seeing blunt force trauma to whichever area was struck? Or are you seeing sharp force trauma, which means it probably wasn't done from a baseball bat? Are you looking at a laceration versus an incision? A laceration, a cut in the skin with the jagged edges, that's from blunt force trauma. An incision is from sharp force trauma. So the medical evidence can have a significant impact, and it can either support or refute witness accounts, victim account, suspect account, and even some of the information that the police provide as well. So some of the things that you're looking for is obviously mechanism of injury, because there's usually an injury in these cases, unless of course it's, you know, a DUI or something like that. Those are kind of different cases where you're looking for information related to any intoxicants that they may or may not have taken. But for the most part, when you're talking about criminal cases, it's assaultive type injuries. So what can you determine in regard to the mechanism of injury? Sharp force, blunt force, trauma, thermal trauma or burns, injury identification and descriptions. Were the injuries properly identified by medical personnel and appropriately and fully described? And this becomes more important when there's not photos associated with the case, because if I'm looking at an ER record, there was no forensic exam done, so it's just the ER and they say multiple bruises to the back. That doesn't really provide me much information. That significantly limits what I can and cannot determine related to the case. So then, you know, also injury sequelae, did they heal okay? Did they have further complications down the line? Again, that either could support a stronger charge, like a first-degree assault or a second-degree assault versus a third. Differential diagnoses. So are there medical conditions that are contributing to the injuries or contributing to slowed healing that should be taken into consideration? Obviously, they don't mitigate the charge, or they don't relieve the person of the charges, but they could be used as mitigating factors. Also, are there other causes for that bruise? Is the bruise a bruise, or is the bruise ecchymosis that could be due to frail vessels or medication? And then you're also, like I said, you're looking at the medical and social history. Did they have drugs in their system at the time? Do they have any medical conditions that are impacting the injuries? Was there any evidence collection? If it was, who was it collected by, and were they trained? What medical procedures were performed? Were they performed up to the current standards of care? And then the healing progress. Did they fully heal? Is there a scar that is still there? Did they have to have long-term occupational or physical therapy? What did that victim go through in relation to the alleged charges? And then policies and procedures. That's pretty much for, forensic medical care or even general medical care. Do they follow their policies and procedures? So I'll let Pat take the next slide, because she did such a great job with it yesterday. But when you're talking about demonstrative aids, really you just want to know, what is the purpose? And the purpose is not for show. The purpose is really to provide information on either, simple or complex concepts in an understandable manner to the juries or the triers of fact. The objective. So if you are going to use a demonstrative aid, why do you need it? What benefit is it going to do in terms of supporting the case, or better demonstrating a point? And then what is the most effective? And this is basically, is it a picture, or is it a piece of equipment? Or something? What is the best effective method to provide the information to the jury? And this is where I'll let Pat. And demonstrative aids, so they can be as simple as a picture, or as complex as animated videos and reconstructions of crimes.
And these are some of the types of demonstrative evidence that you can assist an attorney to create. You might be working with a medical demonstrative evidence company or with a medical illustrator to refine some of these demonstrative aids. Anatomical drawings are available from a variety of software programs. There are also medical illustrators who are trained in anatomy so that they can create custom illustrations. Some attorneys love to present with the old-fashioned foam core boards on easels. Others prefer to use PowerPoints. PowerPoints have the advantage of being very clear in the courtroom, although once the screen is black, they're gone. Whereas if you've got a foam core board sitting on an easel, it could be present throughout the trial so that the jury can refer to it. If you're involved in helping the attorney prepare PowerPoints, make sure that you think about what's going to show up well for contrast, how much lighting there will be in the room, and also don't crowd any slide with lots of words or small letters because they won't be visible. There are some modern courtrooms that are equipped now so that each juror has a little screen in front of them and they can refer to the PowerPoint slide directly in front of them. But many courthouses are not up to speed with technology. Some of them may have been built 100 years ago or 150 years ago when such things were not even thought of. So you can't know in advance without talking to the attorney what type of setting the attorney would expect the trial to be located in. Some attorneys purchase medical equipment, rent a medical equipment. Sometimes they turn to LNCs and say, hey, do you happen to have, this pulse ox in your house or something that you might ordinarily not have? There are ways for them to be able to obtain that equipment and for them to be able to pass it to a juror so that they can handle, say, a Foley catheter, for example, and pass that around. That has a lot more meaning than showing a picture. Charts and graphs are often things that LNCs are asked to assist with. That could be a variety of different points that you want to illustrate. It is critical that they be scrupulously accurate because if they're found to be inaccurate, the judge can eliminate their use in the courtroom. And that means a lot of money and time goes down the drain. I have seen medical illustrators, for example, mix up right versus left when they're looking at a chest x-ray, for example, and put the illustration on the wrong side of the body. That's your job to make sure that the illustrator is being accurate. Timelines can be very effective. An attorney asked me to work on a case involving a woman who said she was sexually assaulted in the hospital around 10 o'clock in the morning. And he asked me to create a timeline of who was in her room in the hospital at certain points in that morning. When did the doctor visit? When were there nurses' notes? When were there vital signs? Was there any lab results that indicated when the blood was drawn? And it turned out there was about a 30-minute period where she was alone and could have been assaulted. You might work with a medical illustrator with various diagnostic test results. Attorneys are very fond of taking x-rays and having an illustrator color in breaks by putting red coloring around the breaks in the bone, for example, or coloring in a subdural hematoma from somebody who's been banged on the head. Photos can be extremely important. Sometimes they are gruesome. The ones that you showed us, Teresa, of the O.J. Simpson crime scene with the blood all over that person's hand. Sometimes attorneys will find that the judge will prevent pictures from being introduced to the jury or won't let them see autopsy photos, for example, and other times the jury can see them. That's clearly the judge's decision. It is possible now to create 3D models. They can be created even with 3D printers. They can be created with physical plastic materials to replicate a skull, for example, or lungs. And they will be created to be accurate based on the X-rays, CTs, and MRIs. Medical reports, you know as well as I do, they are not written for lay people. Your job is to help the attorney explain them to the jury, or you're explaining them to the jury so that they understand what all those medical terms mean. And typically they may be introduced as a page, but then there are call-outs or blowouts that will take one paragraph, for example, and make it larger, perhaps with yellow highlighting to point to specific words on that medical report. And for the attorney who's got a significant case, that attorney may invest in computer animations, which are also extraordinarily expensive. I saw a bill that was $48,000 for something that I worked on with an attorney last year, and it wasn't all that extensive either, but it was expensive. And it was, it just took my breath away how much money was involved in creating a computer animation.
Okay. All right. And then maintaining neutrality. This is, go ahead. This is the bedrock of what we do, because neutrality is the foundation that helps to uphold credibility, professionalism, ethics, truthfulness, and justice, really. You want to make sure that you are providing the information as it is. You can go to the next slide. So one of the things that you want to avoid, and I know it's, so if I forgot this yesterday too, I don't know why, but so, unfortunately there are persons for criminal cases that will tailor their testimony or tailor their consultation to meet the needs of the attorney that they're working with. And honestly, this is a relatively small community. And once the neutrality is out the window, then anything you say or do after that really can just amount to a hill of beans, because it impacts your credibility. It impacts justice. In medical, in civilian cases, there's money on the line. And yes, people may have been significantly injured. But when you're talking about criminal cases, the courts are going to remove somebody from society, and it should be done justly. So making sure to not, you can just pull them all up. Making sure to not get kind of sucked into the win-loss mentality, and knowing that the information you provide is just the information that you provide. Again, that doesn't mean that you cannot help in strategizing on how to use the information, but your opinion should be based on the current science that is available. So it should be evidence-based. You should be able to provide any research, studies, or other documents or information that you use to come to your conclusion. And then be transparent. If you, in just identifying where and how and supporting your opinion with something. And then consistency. So consistency changes. And if you, because I know there was a case, in the same case, I testified different, once in the grand jury and once at the trial, but I was able to identify and explain why. So it was a sexual assault case in the military. And it wasn't really a grand jury. It was called an Article 32 hearing, which is the military's version of a grand jury. So I did the forensic examination on a gentleman who reported a sexual assault. And there were findings that at first, I was very early in my career. At that time, I thought it was injury. Well, the case didn't go to trial for 3 years. So then 3 years later, after reviewing myself, I knew at the grand jury I had made a mistake. So, and it was actually, they weren't injuries, they were medical findings. So I got on the stand during the trial, and I, at that point, changed, and I said that they were medical findings. So of course, the opposition pulls out my grand jury transcript because it's public record and it's part of the trial. And he said, well, 3 years ago, you said that it was an injury. I said, I understand that. However, I was incorrect at that time. I now have more training, more experience. And based on that, my findings now is that this is a medical condition. So, consistency is key, but it can transpire through time. But you want to make sure that you are talking to the current science and the current standards. And then also in criminal defense or in criminal cases, it's important that you make yourself available to both prosecution and defense, because you don't want to seem like a hired gun, so to speak, for the prosecution or the defense by only working with one area. Like I said, we provide things in an objective manner. So the medical evidence is not going to change. And what you tell whomever you're working with should not change. So being open to working with both prosecution and defense. Now, I will say, it doesn't always shake out that way, because for my civilian cases, I'm 100% defense. And that does come up. I have been asked, well, you only testify for the defense in these cases. And I'm like, well, yes. I said, but I say that's only because the prosecution never calls me. My services are available to both prosecution and defense. Military cases, I'm about 75-25 for the defense. But again, that's just because I get more calls to work with the defense. I am fully open. I have to put food on my table. So I'm open to work with whoever's going to call me and hire me. Next. Oh.
We hope that this has so far stimulated your curiosity and your appetite for more. And before Teresa finishes up this program and I give you more details about the conference, this is a quick overview of the fact that we have a 3-day conference planned for May 30, 31, and June 1st, specifically about murder. And it is an online course that is convenient to attend. No airline tickets, no hotel, no food, although you're allowed to feed yourself. No parking, all of those expenses don't exist when you join us online. The link for that conference is lnc.tips/murder. And I'll share more details about this at the end when Teresa is finished.
So the final thing that I want to talk about is becoming the attorney's safety net. Looking at your role and maybe looking beyond, because I think you can go ahead. As nurses, we're always thinking outside of the box. We come into contact with so many different professions that we learn a little bit about all of them. And we are able to seamlessly fold that information into our nursing practice. Well, the same thing goes here. So when I approach a case, when I get a case and I'm giving the attorney, a verbal review on the phone or something, I usually start with, well, if I was consulting for, let's say I'm working with the defense, I say, if I was consulting for the prosecution, this is what I would tell them, because then I can, that lets the defense attorney that I'm working with know that I'm kind of thinking beyond, because whatever the prosecution says or does or admits into evidence, they need to refute. So they need to have a plan, a counterattack plan, or a defense plan for the information the prosecution is going to provide. So that's usually what I say, because when I do these cases, I usually, in terms of strategy and utilizing the medical evidence, that's how you think. How is the opposition going to use this information, and how can the defense or whoever, how can they counter it or kind of lessen the blow if it's something very bad? So you want to be able to have a counter strategy. Forensics Forensics is very important if you want to work on criminal cases. So if you don't have foundational information on forensics, then you want to look into gaining a good understanding. And basically, you can go ahead. In forensics, the foundation of forensics is the low cards exchange principle. Essentially, everyone leaves a trace. And this was developed, as simple as it is, it was developed by a French criminalist back in the early 1900s, I think. And this is what they go on. Next. So what he said, his name was Locard, and he said, when a person comes in contact with an object, a person, a cross transfer of materials occurs. So every time you touch your phone, you're leaving yourself on that phone. And that's what it is. Anytime you shake hands with somebody, you're picking up some of their skin cells and they're picking up some of your skin cells. So when you look at these, you also want to look at what evidence was or was not collected that can link the crime scene to the assailant, that can link the crime scene to the victim, that can link the victim to the assailant, and what links all three of them together. And this is good because it also helps you to determine, to point out things to the attorney. Maybe they need to find a criminalist to look at this as well, because I think there was some evidence maybe that wasn't collected that could have been. Also, if you're thinking of facilities that don't have forensic nurses or forensic healthcare programs, and they get a gunshot wound. So what evidence was collected from that? And do those persons have training in evidence collection? What evidence was not collected that is now lost and not able to be used in the case? So having a good foundation in forensics is a key element of consulting on criminal cases. Okay. Also recommending and locating additional experts. When I do sexual assault cases, in about 90% of them, there are drugs or alcohol involved. And then you've also got just kind of some of those counterintuitive behaviors that some survivors of sexual assault may display. So usually I call it the trifecta of sexual assault cases: the SANE nurse to evaluate the medical evidence, a forensic toxicologist, or even a forensic nurse, forensic toxicologist to evaluate the alcohol or drugs involved, and then a forensic psychologist to kind of evaluate all the players involved and to help them to understand the dynamics there. But there was a case. It was an alleged attempted suicide by cop, and they were trying to identify where the gentleman was standing. He got hit, I think, once or twice, not fatally. And in that, the police officer and the medical examiner, they did a reconstruction, and I'm going to put this into quotation marks, a reconstruction of the shooting in somebody's office, standing in the office doorway using a rubber shotgun. That in no way would pass a Daubert hearing. Now, I'm not a criminalist. I'm not a shooting reconstructionist, but I do have enough knowledge to be able to tell the attorney that is not going to cut the mustard. And he really, and I said, but I'm not an expert in this area. And he told me, he's like, well, can you please just add that to your report, because it'll strengthen my argument when I argue to have it excluded. And then also, what is the medical evidence? Understanding the medical evidence and current scientific limitations. Okay. So what may the medical evidence tell the courts? It can tell them the mechanism of injury, sharp force, blunt force, what injuries were sustained through trauma, the presence of contributing factors. It may help to determine where people were standing. What are some of the medical conditions that impact this? Were there drugs or alcohol involved? Approximate age of certain injuries, as long as you have enough information about them. Okay, go ahead. But as with all sciences, this has a limit. And so, the exact cause of an injury, was it intentional? Was it accidental? Was it self-inflicted? That cannot always be determined, except for, and of course, the cases of suicide, where it's very clearly determined to be able to be determined who caused that injury. But in most cases, I don't know who caused that injury. The exact age of an injury, especially a bruise. A lot of people like to look at a bruise and say, oh, it's about a week old. Well, there's too many factors that fall into it. And there is no scientific research that I've found that allows any person to look at a bruise and determine the age. And then consent. And this comes in, erotic asphyxiation cases, sexual assault cases. Of course, this is for persons of the age to provide consent. So you cannot determine consent through medical evidence. This is a legal term and not a diagnosis of any sort. So even if there's injuries, it still may have been consensual.
At this
And now
point,
back over to
I'm going to be
I was
telling
gonna say-
you a little bit more about the conference. And if you've got questions, please start putting them in the chat. We have a 3-day conference planned for you to provide you with the knowledge and the support and some networking opportunities. Focus specifically on the topic of murder, taught online with a variety of experts, including forensic nurses, investigators, attorneys, forensic nurses who run forensic practices will be part of our panel of speakers. Teresa is going to be covering the mechanics of murder, the ways that people die, and there's 3 main ones that she will discuss. We have a forensic nurse coming in who specializes in investigating cases in which infants and children are killed. There was just a story last week about a man who drank 10 beers, fell asleep on the sofa. His 6-month-old infant was on the sofa next to him. He woke up the next morning. The child had been wedged into one of the cushions and was dead and had been suffocated by the father rolling on top of him while he was drunk. There will be insider tips from LNCs who are running their businesses handling forensic cases, and that will consist of a panel discussion in which you can ask questions. Arlene Klepatsky, who's a nurse attorney and part of my coaching program, will talk about how DNA is solving both hot cases as well as cold cases. What are the opportunities to catch people many years after the crime was committed? We have an investigator who is coming in to talk about how forensic evidence is collected at the crime scene. Teresa has touched on this, in which she was discussing the collection of evidence. And I see a question in the chat. Teresa, can you nod your head to say whether you can hear me? Okay, so it might be on the end of the person who lost the sound. Looking at how evidence is collected in a healthcare environment and how that affects the integrity of the evidence is key. We have a nurse attorney who used to be a legal nurse consultant, Joe Flores, who many of you know if you've attended our conferences before. He'll talk about the different types of charges and how the law holds people accountable, as well as a defense attorney who will share his perspective. He is proud to say that he's never lost a case. He's always been successful in defending somebody or getting a plea bargained down to something that is less severe. Teresa will offer some coaching sessions for people who are attending the program, and there will be VIP sessions, which are question and answer sessions at the end of each day, the first 2 days. Jean Cooper, who is a legal nurse consultant, also part of my coaching community, works exclusively in the area of criminal cases and personal injury cases. She was successful in getting a woman released from prison after 14 years by helping the defense team marshal evidence that would allow her conviction to be reversed. The defense team was able to raise the doubt about whether she killed her child by pointing to some medical changes in the child that could be attributed to other causes other than the one that this woman was accused of, and she got out of prison. There will be a session on strangulation, one of the more common mechanisms of death, and how the forensic nurse looks at skin changes and sequences of events to focus specifically on helping to analyze a strangulation case. And lots of opportunities for networking. This conference is May 30, 31, and June 1st. We are so excited to put this together for you. There are super early bird prices now in effect. When you join us as a VIP, you'll be able to participate in the hour-long Q&A sessions with Teresa at the end of each of the days. There'll be an opportunity for you also to get the recordings, as well as to have some chance to talk about your business concerns and questions with our Barbara Levin, who will be in the coaching zone to be able to meet with each of you. The VIP ticket at this point with a super early bird investment is $450. If you know that you can't join us, but you would like to have the recordings, or you're not interested in the recordings, you'll be there live without recordings, that's a $350 investment. And the link again is lnc.tips/murder. We would love to have you join us and be part of this exciting event where you'll have an opportunity to get forensic training that will be useful for you when you are consulting on forensic cases. And Teresa, I'm going to look at the chat, and Erin has asked a question. Is there a formal program or accredited nursing professional organization you recommend starting with to learn forensics? I'll be definitely signing up for the conference. Thank you, Erin.
So there's a couple of forensic nursing organizations. The first one is the Academy of Forensic Nurses. That's a newer organization, but it's very dynamic and there's a lot of training there. And then there's also the International Association of Forensic Nursing. Those, but to look for introduction, for evidence collection, handling and stuff, I don't know that either of those have those, but they do have topics on forensic healthcare and different aspects of that. But we do. Do you still have those courses that I put together, Pat, on evidence collection and stuff?
Yes, when you sign up for the conference, watch for the thank you page. We have 3 conferences or courses that we've done, and we offer you a 50% discount on the recordings and all the materials for those. The first one we did was The Path of the Bullet, dealing specifically with gunshot wounds. The second was on sexual assault, and there's a whole self-learning set of videos on evidence collection and DNA. And the third one was on domestic violence, specifically the injuries that are caused within that scenario. So yes, those are available. Kristen asked, are there opportunities for an LNC in this area behind the scenes who wants to work behind the scenes or build experience and knowledge in this area? Teresa, you want to talk about behind the scenes consulting?
Yeah, certainly, because when I do this, I don't always testify. There's some cases that I just come on to consult because a lot of the times if I can help the attorney draft his cross-examination questions for the opposition's medical provider or medical expert who's testifying, then I don't need to testify. And it doesn't look like kind of a battle of the experts. And that actually can sometimes look better if they can get the information they need from the opposition's expert. So yeah, certainly there's opportunities just to consult. And then if they want somebody to testify, you can always find someone to testify as well.
Robert brought up a great point. I once thought about doing forensic nursing, but it seemed like it went the direction of just doing sane cases. And as a male, I figured that a woman who was sexually assaulted wouldn't want to see a man doing their exam. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, surprisingly, the male sexual assault examiners that I've met, they have never really ever encountered problems with females objecting to them. And, you know, you can always, in those examinations, they're always offered a victim advocate. And so, you know, that's a second person that could be in the room if either the victim or the examiner felt uncomfortable, then they'd have kind of that third party in the room as a chaperone of sorts. But no, there are men that do it, and it's expanded. Yes, it started out kind of sexually assault examination based, but it has significantly expanded in the last couple of decades.
And then Robert also asked about getting criminal cases, or is it a matter of reaching out to defense attorneys or the district attorney's office? And we will be addressing this during the conference, during the panel discussion. How do you get your foot in the door? Tell us, Teresa, give us a sneak preview on the answer to that question.
It's not unlike getting cases for civilian consulting. So finding out, you know, is there a criminal defense or a prosecution association in your state that has conferences that you can go do an exhibit for. And, you know, if you like doing the legwork, certainly contacting attorneys in your local area or wherever. So yeah, it's a lot of the advertising is very similar to just legal nurse consulting in general.
Nicole asked if I sign up for the conference, but maybe working, is it something that I can come and go? I lost that spot. And then watch the recording if I miss something, or would that disrupt the conference? No, Nicole, that's the purpose of investing in the recording, so that you can pick up things that you miss when you have to leave. As long as you don't unmute yourself, break into the presentation and say, hey, this is Nicole, I'm leaving now. You won't be disruptive. If you do that, we'll mute you. But I don't think that's what you meant. So you can quietly sneak out and no one will notice. The Path of the Bullet, sexual assault, and domestic violence trainings are on the thank you page when you sign up for the conference. That is the discount available to the people who are joining the program. If you send me, Shannon, an email, I can also give you links to those pages to get the recordings, but you won't get a 50% discount on them. You will see the price that we charge for. I'm writing down your name so that I don't forget it either. The price that it is available for people who are not part of the conference. All right, we've got more messages here. Are there specific qualifications that an attorney would look for when choosing an LNC to review a forensic case?
Well, a basic knowledge of forensics. My dogs are starting to go nuts here. Basic knowledge of forensics. And just injury identification. You know, in terms of forensic nursing, a lot of people think that you have to have an ER background. And certainly, you know, in regard to seeing a lot of different injuries, especially very shortly after they happened, yes, that is a plus. But I've never been an ER nurse. I did med surge. I did mother baby. I did same day surgery. But, you know, just the foundational injury identification that we have as nurses, just building upon that is good. And you don't specifically have to work in an ER or be a forensic nurse, but having good, attention to detail and injury identification and interpretation is good. And you can find that training online and in various places. So
Diane Honigoski, who is an ER nurse, says, before saying I used to perform a lot of sexual assault kits, but I never went through a formal certification. Would I need to be certified to testify?
no, you don't. It's not a requirement to testify as long as you have the experience to back you up.
Irene's comments, I just completed the same course, but have not applied my knowledge in a clinical setting. I hoped that this would help get criminal cases.
It might, I would say, the consulting aspect of it, they might, in terms of testifying, they would, I'm sure, prefer that you have clinical experience in that area. So I don't know if you can get that, but certainly the consulting you can do. Because I don't do peds. I'm not a peds nurse, never have been. I don't do, I've never done a sexual assault exam on pediatrics. Never done a domestic violence exam or, an abuse exam on pediatrics, but I have consulted on those cases. I just don't testify.
Okay, that's an important distinction.
Yes.
And I believe that we have caught all of the questions. This is your opportunity. If there's anything else that you would like to ask Teresa, to get your question into the chat before we close off, because we will close off when it seems like the activity has stopped in the chat. We look forward to having you at the conference, and thank you so much for your attention today. This is one of those topics that you have to be wired to enjoy, and I think legal nurse consultants are wired. When we
I
talk
agree.
about Black humor, this might be the blackest of the Black humor in healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Where we can, and I'm sure there are attorneys who laugh, like somebody who bungles a suicide attempt, for example, like he couldn't get it right, he missed. You can imagine the conversations that go on. And Teresa told me the other day about a man who, I still can't figure out why he did this, Teresa, who wired a gun to a tree and figured out how to pull a rope to pull the trigger. Can you tell the group
Yes.
just about that before we finish?
It was a case, I think it was a case study I read. For whatever reason, I don't know if they ever found out the reason, because that wasn't involved in there, but he had rigged a gun to a tree with a rope and committed suicide that way. And it took them, I don't know how he must have had it on some sort of a system where the rope was somewhere where it wasn't so visible afterward. But they at first thought it was a murder because he was shot in the back of the head from a distance, because you can have a general estimation of the distance of fire based on the presentation of the gunshot wound. So they thought, well, it couldn't have been a suicide because there was too much distance. But lo and behold, somebody found the rope and he had rigged it to a tree and committed suicide. I don't know why. Yeah, it was crazy.
It seems like it was a little convoluted. Like, why couldn't you just held it in your hand? But one cannot get information from a corpse as to why
Right.
he did it that way. I see lots of comments of thanks in the chat. Teresa, you'll enjoy hearing this has been very helpful and great information, helpful information. Thank you so much for being part of this event. We have enjoyed having you here. I will go back to reading my crime novel now so that I can get even more of this topic, and look forward to seeing you again.
Yes. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Teresa. Great job.
All right. Good night.
Good night, all.